Welcome to Healing Chronic Illness with Marley, your go-to podcast for detoxing stress and reclaiming your health. I'm Marley Jones, a naturopath specializing in functional brain health. And here's the truth. To heal your body, you must fix your brain. Chronic stress fuels illness, but stress resilience unlocks true healing and an optimal life. Join me for practical brain and body healing strategies. Sometimes I'm solo, sometimes I have expert guests with cutting-edge treatments and natural solutions just for you. No matter where you are on your healing journey, you'll find real hope, actionable tools, and the support you need. Healing is possible, my friends. You're not alone. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Healing Chronic Illness with Marley podcast. Today, I want to talk about something very common for so many people that's often overlooked. And this is a very hefty episode filled with a ton of information. So get ready. We're going to be talking about histamines and mast cells, because it's one of the most overlooked pieces in chronic illness. Whether you have anxiety, brain fog, fatigue, hormone issues, food reactions, POTS, chronic pain, or all of those things, it is often rooted in mast cell issues and histamine. So let's talk about it. This episode was inspired by a recent episode that Dave Asprey had with his Human Upgrade podcast with Dr. Jessica Petros. We seem to circulate in the same circles with practitioners and protocols because she's a root cause lady who's been through it herself. And so this where Dr. Jess is talking with Dave, she's talking a lot about mast cell activation syndrome and histamine issues and why those people end up being with her, because it's complicated. So I love how she unpacks it and explains it. So a lot of times that deeper problem involves multiple immune issues, multiple triggers, multiple layers of dysfunction. Mast cells are in your body for a reason, but when they get out of control is when we have a problem. One of the things Dr. Jess shared is that histamine can show up differently depending on where it is affecting the body. She explains that histamine in the brain can look like racing thoughts, ruminating thoughts, and brain fog. Histamine in the heart can look like palpitations and POTS. Histamine in the gut can be bloating, acid reflux, loose stools. Histamine in the skin can look like hives, eczema, and rashes. Histamine in the uterus can be connected to endometriosis. Histamine in the bladder can be connected to interstitial cystitis. And histamine systemically can show up as anaphylaxis. That framework is so important because most people hear the word histamine and just immediately think of allergies, sneezing, itching, runny nose, watery eyes, maybe needing an antihistamine during pollen season. But histamine is much bigger than just allergies. Histamine is a chemical messenger. It's involved in immune defense, inflammation, gut function, blood vessels, sleep-wake rhythm, the brain, the nervous system. Histamines are what God gave us for a reason. And when they're out of control and dysregulated is when we have a problem. One of the main cells that release histamine is the mast cell. Now, mast cells are immune cells that live throughout the body, especially in places where we interface with the outside world. What does that mean? Well, our gut is actually outside world. When you think about it, mouth to rectal, it's open, right? Your skin interacts with the outside world. Your lungs do, your sinuses, your connective tissue, blood vessels, bladder. Those are a little more internal, but they're still interacting with the outside world, as well as your reproductive tissue and, of course, your brain neuropathways. And the job of these mast cells is pretty clear. It's to protect you. They're like the immune sensory cells. They detect threat. They sound the alarm in the body. They release these chemical messengers. And when the body is responding appropriately, it's a good thing. But what happens when the system gets stuck on with this threat, this alarm that's going off? Well, what happens when mast cells become too reactive? What happens when histamine is no longer just a temporary immune response, but part of a chronic inflammatory pattern? It's kind of like being stuck in fight or flight, right? And so this is where this conversation becomes very important for people with chronic illness, because for some people, histamine does not just show up as allergies. It can show up as anxiety. It can show up as panic. It can show up as heart palpitations. Maybe it's acid reflux or bloating or alternating between constipation and diarrhea, or just having digestive issues in general. And that's going to affect everything because that's one of your main detox pathways, right? Maybe it's in your skin, and maybe it's involving your bladder. Maybe it's involving some of your girly issues if you have endometriosis flares. Or it can show up as POTS, brain fog, insomnia. All of that sleep dysregulation can be because of histamine issues and mast cell problems. And so what happens at the end of all of this is that you have a body that feels like it's reacting to everything. So one key point is this, is that again, mast cells are not bad. Histamine is not bad, just like stress isn't. But it's when there is a maladaptive reaction or a dysregulation involved that it becomes a problem. Your body is designed to respond and then calm back down. Sounds like nervous system again, right? Parasympathetic, sympathetic response. It's all tied together, my friends. But in chronic illness and when you have mold exposure or long-term infections, maybe there's some circulative trauma, hormone shifts or gut dysfunctions, or you have chemical exposure, whether it was a one-time thing and your body's not been able to clear it, or it's ongoing. Maybe it's a viral reactivation. Epstein-Barr can be at the root of it. It's common. It's not always just that virus, but that's the heavy hitter. Nervous system dysregulation, chronic stress physiology. This is where the body just is in that constant fight or flight, brace, alarm, hypervigilant state. It's constant. And those mast cells are what? They're alarm cells. They're constantly asking, are we safe? And if the body keeps receiving those signals that it is not safe, then the mast cells keep firing. So one of the things that I had done early on when I'd first been diagnosed with MCAS is start with the typical over-the-counter, and I use it from time to time when I feel like my bucket's too full. And it's the H1 and H2 histamine blockers, which for H1, that would be your antihistamines like Claritin. And so I buy it at Costco. I think they have 2 packs, and take that as needed. And then Pepcid as your H2 blocker. So this is one of the most important parts of that MCAS conversation, is that maybe those antihistamines are falling a little short. And here's why. Because most people with MCAS are only just doing those antihistamines, and that's okay. That's a start. But it's not always the answer for everybody. And so for some people, antihistamines help. They can be useful, they can help reduce symptoms, they can help calm part of that histamine response, but those only block that one pathway. So when you have MCAS, your immune system can be triggering dozens of things and not just allergens. That is why that one pill alone, Claritin and or Pepcid, often doesn't address the entire pattern within your body, because mast cells are not only responding to pollen or food, they can be triggered by stress hormones, estrogen spikes, mold or gut bacterial toxins. Sometimes it's blue light from your phone. Sometimes it's temperature changes. I just came back from a trip to Scotland and I was very ill prepared. I went from freezing cold to getting into a hot bath. And guess what that does? It releases histamines. Certain foods, even if you ate them your whole life and you start reacting to them, it's something to consider. Are your mast cells overactive? Infections, chemicals, here's a good one, fragrances. I have a big issue with that. I'm very chemically sensitive. Alcohol, I need to avoid that. You probably do too. Heat, cold, exercise. All those kind of things that are in our day-to-day life can be perceived as threat. Your mast cells do not always care what the trigger is. They just fire, and they keep firing. And that is why reactions can feel random sometimes. And part of the body that's overloaded or sensitized and living with this lower threshold might be that it's your foods. Maybe you're fine eating gluten, and then maybe you sneak it in again, and then you react. You know, your bucket gets too full. One day you can tolerate maybe a muskmelon, honeydew melon, and then the next time you have it, you react. One day you tolerate a supplement, the next day it flares you up. One day heat feels good, the next day heat makes your heart race. Maybe you're okay in the sauna, and then you're suddenly not. And then one day stress feels manageable, and then the next day a stressful conversation that you might have at work or with a friend can create flushing, itching, palpitations, nausea, or the sense of doom and gloom. I hate that one. That is why this goal of this podcast is not just to let you know about how to block histamine, but really addressing it. So the goal here is to understand the entire chain between mast cells getting triggered and why you're feeling awful. There are multiple steps in that chain, and there is the trigger, and the trigger is the mast cell response, and that's where there is this release of inflammatory chemicals, which is a nervous system reaction. It's also a hormone response, it's a vascular response, it's a gut response. It involves all the systems in some way or another. This is your body's ability or inability to break those chemicals down and then clear them out. So to actually get better, many people have to address every layer. And it's not just the histamine, nor the food, nor the supplement, or just the stress, or the mold, or not just the nervous system. It's all the layers. So the protocol has to become layered because the condition is layered. Mast cells look different than allergies. It's very important. A true allergic reaction is often a sudden, massive release, whereas MCAS can be different. MCAS can be a slow leak, like a low-level constant activation that builds over time, and occasionally it spikes into a flare. That is why some people do not look like they're having a classic allergic reaction, yet they feel inflamed, reactive, exhausted, anxious, swollen, just backed up and toxic. You might be foggy-headed, wired but tired, dizzy, fluish. It's not just the histamine. Oftentimes, there are other inflammatory chemicals driving these symptoms, and mast cells release many mediators, not just histamines. That means someone may block histamine and still feel awful because their inflammatory chemicals are still active. This is why MCAS care and protocols, and people that, like, if you're going to look into this, you need to move beyond just asking what histamine should you take. The bigger question here is, what is triggering my mast cells? What are they releasing? And why can't my body clear it efficiently? So Jess says that histamine in the brain is racing thoughts, rumination, and brain fog. So let's talk about that. The brain can have a histamine overload that shows up as all those things, right? And it sounds like anxiety and panic disorder. And that's why many people get mislabeled or misdiagnosed, saying it's just anxiety, or they're told that they're overthinking, or they're told that they're too stressed. And yes, anxiety is emotional. And sometimes it's based in cyclical trauma, childhood trauma, ongoing trauma. Sometimes it's just chronic stress overload. Sometimes it is your thought patterns that your brain has wired. But sometimes what feels like anxiety may also involve histamine, mast cells, blood sugar issues, your hormones, your low cortisol, not just high cortisol, but low cortisol, and the wrong times to have high and low cortisol. We'll talk about that. Dysautonomia, inflammation, mold exposure, or just general nervous system overload. Histamine in the brain can feel like you cannot shut your mind off. Might be looping doom loops, looping thoughts, feel like panic and feel like internal agitation. It can feel like a body that is wired but tired. That's why this just anxiety and this generalized anxiety disorder that your doc might tell you has harmed so many chronically ill people, because even when anxiety is present, the better question is, what is the body producing in this alarm state? Is my histamine too high? Are my mast cells activated? Is this chronic inflammation based on that? Is my cortisol low? Are my adrenals just beat like a dead horse? Or what do you call it? Kicking a dead horse, or whatever it is. When the horse has been rode hard and exhausted and you keep going, eventually it's just gonna tap out, right? Is that your adrenal system? And is your adrenaline compensating for cortisol? Are you reacting to mold? So common where I live in the state of Florida. It's because of mold exposure. And maybe it's estrogen driving your histamine. A lot of these symptoms get worse during perimenopause. Is your progesterone low? Is your gut inflamed? Do you have leaky gut? Is your nervous system stuck in fight or flight? When we ask better questions, we can stop shaming people and just calling it generalized anxiety, right? Dr. Jess says that histamine in the heart can show up as palpitations and post-orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or POTS. Dr. Jess also explains that histamine in the heart can be a big part of people with chronic illnesses when they have heart racing, dizziness, lightheadedness, blood pressure changes, and feeling like their body cannot regulate when you go from like sitting or laying down to standing up. I remember being in a yoga class and doing sun salutations and bending down and then trying to stand up and like blacking out. I had to quit. Just a gentle, simple yoga class just did me in because the POTS was so bad, and it's because I couldn't regulate my blood pressure, and it definitely made me anxious. But histamines can affect your blood vessels too, and your mast cells are involved in how your blood vessels work. And when the vascular system is involved, symptoms can actually be really scary. Your heart may race, your body might feel shaky, standing might feel difficult. I remember I couldn't go for a walk around the block. I couldn't even stand at my front door and have a conversation if someone had come over. I had to sit down. That's how bad it was for me. If I stood to put on mascara, I'd black out. I'd have to sit down to lift my arm to put on mascara. It was terrible because I get so lightheaded or I'd want to black out. This can be from adrenal exhaustion, but look at POTS, look at dysautonomia, look at your autonomic nervous system. This may feel like your body is overreacting to heat, meals, stress, exertion, or even standing. POTS is a real thing. There is a podcast that I have done earlier if you need help with POTS or orthostatic intolerance, and there is a protocol attached to it. Just do a search for Healing Chronic Illness with Marley and look for the POTS episode. I think you'll find it very helpful. So again, doesn't mean that every heart palpitation is histamine, but it is something to consider. Heart symptoms should always be evaluated medically. I was sent to the emergency room multiple times because of heart issues. Nobody there understood MCAS. Until recently, the hospital that I was going to actually has an electrophysiologist / cardiologist that understands mast cell activation syndrome. So yeah, if you do need to find a specialist in that area, look for an electrophysiologist because they're not just looking at the structural things in an EKG or putting a Holter monitor on you to check what's going on with your heartbeat or your blood pressure. They're actually going to look at the electrical signaling, and that is a hormone issue and a brain issue, okay? And MCAS is becoming part of the conversation finally. So Dr. Jess goes on to talk about histamine in the gut can be bloating, reflux, acid reflux, loose stools. She explains that histamine in that gut is a thing. It's often a major missing piece. A lot of people think food reactions are only about food, but sometimes food reactions are about the immune system in the gut. Mast cells are abundant in the gastrointestinal tract, and when they become activated, the gut can become reactive, and food might feel like a threat as well. Digestion may become unpredictable. Maybe some days are okay and other days you're not. And you've got to keep digestive enzymes and pepsin handy. That's been my life off and on. Although, it's funny. I just came back from 3 weeks in the United Kingdom. And whenever I pack, I put little Ziplocs together of all of the supplements that I need. And I packed a large Ziploc with plenty of enzymes for a 3-week stay. And did you know that not even once did I need to have an enzyme? And then as soon as I came back and we had a layover in Charlotte at the airport, I had a meal there and I was sick to my stomach immediately. And I was like, welcome back to the United States, where food feels like a threat. It's interesting whether it's seed oils or GMO or whatever they're spraying on our crops, and then we're harvesting and thinking I'm not going to eat organic food in an airport. I know that. But sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. But it's just a harsh reminder of the quality of our food in the United States. But that's another episode entirely. So one day a food might feel fine to you. The next day you're dealing with bloating, cramping, diarrhea, nausea. Or one of the indicators that I know that my histamines are a little active is I actually get red flushing in my palms of my hands. And I just recently discovered this. Fermented foods, for a lot of people for gut health, they're supposed to be eating fermented foods, but then suddenly they have an issue, right? I know that I have to be careful with leftovers because they can become a problem because histamine can actually increase when you've stored food or been eating leftovers. I also have to be careful with fermented foods. I know that they're really good about prebiotics and probiotics in the gut, but fermented foods are high in histamine. Another thing I have to avoid is alcohol. Alcohol is fermented, right? I feel horrible when I drink alcohol. I get pressure in my head. Aged foods also can trigger symptoms. As much as you think it's just so romantic to go out to a nice fancy steakhouse and have a glass of wine and you eat that aged beef, look out. You're probably not going to feel too well if you've got MCAS issues. Even healthy foods may become difficult during a flare. That's why some people are unable to eat the things that they used to. And so I know people that have been in such a bad place before they healed their brain and regulated their nervous system. They were down to sweet potatoes and that was it. It's the only thing that they could eat. And so you want your mast cells to calm down just so that you can enjoy a larger variety of foods again. That's a goal in and of itself. So the goal is to calm the system, lower the histamine load, and support your digestion, support your gut, stabilize the mast cells, and just help your body regain tolerance again so that you can eat food at an airport and not react, right? That was just an out of the ordinary situation for me, but it was a harsh reminder again, and of course I was glad I had my enzymes. Dr. Jess also talks about histamine in the skin showing up as hives, eczema, and rashes, and this is probably the most familiar histamine picture for most people because they think of an allergic reaction. You get itchy and red in the face, and you get hot and hives, and you've got all of this stuff showing up in the skin, right? But even here, the skin is not separate from the rest of the body. The skin is also part of the immune system. I know that when your liver and your kidneys are backed up, where's it going to put it? It's got to get out of your bloodstream, right? So it's going to store it in the skin. Dermatologists are paid very well, but it's a very, very complicated specialty. Oftentimes, skin issues reflect internal inflammation. How your gut health is reflects environmental exposures. It reflects your stress chemistry. It reflects the mast cell behavior in general. So when the skin is reacting, the body may be telling us that the immune system is on high alert again, right? Dr. Jess also talks about histamine in the uterus showing up as endometriosis. And one of the most important points from her breakdown is that histamine is connected in this area and often treated as only a reproductive issue. But it is inflammatory, it's immune related, it is hormone sensitive, and mast cells may play a very key role in this inflammatory pelvic pain patterns. Many people with endometriosis also have, which my mom had, have other inflammatory conditions such as food sensitivities, gut symptoms, fatigue, pain sensitivity, and sometimes mast cell histamine symptoms. So if you've got painful cycles or pelvic pain, bloating, histamine symptoms, hormone flares, you need to just stop thinking that it's just reproductive health and be looking at the entire immune system because it's all together, right? The gut's not separate from it. The nervous system is not separate from it. These systems all go together, and that's why root cause thinking is so important. Interstitial cystitis, Dr. Jess shares that there's a link here as well, and it can involve bladder pain, urinary urgency, frequency, burning, pelvic pain, constant feeling that something is irritated when the standard infection testing may not explain the symptoms, right? And so you're not showing that you have a UTI, but something's not right. And for some people, those mast cells and histamines may be part of the bladder inflammation. So look into it. Foods may trigger those bladder symptoms. Stress may do it. If that's your weak link, that's where it's going to go. Okay? And then finally, histamine, when it's systemic and super overloaded, we have the scariest of all, the anaphylaxis. This is the severe end of the mast cell spectrum. And anaphylaxis can involve trouble breathing, throat swelling, low blood pressure, fainting, widespread hives, vomiting, diarrhea, rapid systemic reactions, right? This is where it's an emergency. And if someone has symptoms of anaphylaxis, you have to go and take care of it right away. Carry your EpiPen. I have a friend that has it so severe. She has spent months over the last however many years in the hospital. She's had an open port where she has put in H1 and H2 blockers and Tylenol right through her port just to get through the day. I actually had a conversation with her recently, and this is just a side note for some of you, that the GLP-1 and GLP-2, you might know them as what people are using to lose weight. You know, peptides, which our body has naturally, but people are injecting them now for weight loss. There's been information and hopefully more research where they're seeing that these GLP-1s and GLP-2s are wiping out people's inflammation. So she told me that when she got on semaglutide, because a lot of her inflammation has put on weight, the cortisol, all of the illness, she's uncomfortable, she's inflamed, and she got on semaglutide, and it was probably for weight loss, but the surprise was it calmed her mast cells. And she's struggled with this for years. So that's something to look into, my friends. So this mast cell protocol that Jess talks about, I want to look at layers here and talk to your doctor or your healthcare provider about it. Go back and listen to Dr. Jess's podcast with Dave. Because the problem with MCAS is that attacking a single pathway is always the answer, and that's why it's complicated. So if you only block histamine but do not calm the mast cell, the body may keep firing. If you calm histamine but ignore the leukotrienes, which is another thing within the body that signals we want that inflammation to go away, it's not going to. If you take supplements but you're staying in the mold, your bucket keeps filling because the exposure is constant. If you avoid high histamine foods but you're not sleeping, your nervous system is still going to stay reactive. So you got to look at all of these things. And I know it's a lot. I know you're tired. I know you're worn out. But I do want you to look at these things. Something else is very important is that if you go after the kill and you detox too aggressively before you calm the nervous system and open up your detox pathway, you're going to feel so sick you can't continue. And if you want some help with that or some more information on it, you can go to detoxstress.com. Listen to my masterclass on there. It's going to explain why when you go after a detox protocol, why you have to do it in a very specific order. If you decide to treat the gut, but you ignore your hormones and your estrogen spikes keep triggering histamines, you're going to have a problem. So you've got to look at all these things. You have to look at calming the nervous system and clearing the infections, removing the chemical toxicity in your life, getting out of mold. And if you don't, the immune system and those mast cells stay activated. So the protocol has to address every layer. Here's the first one. Identify what is triggering the mast cells. All right, so common triggers can be stress hormones, mold, gut bacterial toxins, maybe it's blue light exposure, maybe it's shifting barometric pressure or temperatures, maybe it's certain foods, maybe you need to do an allergy panel, not just the basic one, but go after the 72-hour one. Sometimes allergies don't show up until like days later when the body just can't break it down. Look at alcohol intake. Avoid it if you can. Switch to mocktails. Drink water. Put some electrolytes in there too. Avoid leftovers. Be mindful of fermented foods. Let's avoid fragrances, especially if they're made in a lab. And then, of course, if you're struggling with high histamine levels and you're outside all the time gardening when the pollen is flying, just brace yourself because you're going to feel a little worse. And do what you can to clear the infections. Parasitic infections, that's a big one. Lots of us have parasites. You don't have to live in a third world country, right? So your mast cells don't always care what the trigger is. It could be poor sleep. It could be emotional stress. It could be overexerting yourself in exercise. It could be a basic medication and the filler in that medication. I know I had a colleague, she's an acupuncturist, and she had a patient that was prescribed progesterone. But the problem was she was very allergic to, I believe it's corn, like a corn product that if you just buy it from Walgreens, just be careful, be mindful not only of the medications that you take, but the fillers that's in them. You might need to switch to a compounding pharmacy, okay? Your mast cells really don't care what the trigger is, they just fire. This is why your reactions can feel random, but they don't have to be random. They may be connected to your body's total load. So think of that histamine bucket and how full it is. So rather than asking, why am I reacting to everything? The better question may be, what is filling my bucket faster than my body can clear it? So then we need to look at stabilizing the mast cells themselves. The next layer is stabilizing them. So maybe you need to look into talking to your practitioner about things like cromolyn or some of those things. I tried it. It dried me out too much, and just intuitively, I didn't think that was a fit for me. And so I've done a lot more PEA. Something else that helps address this layer of calming mast cells is lactoferrin, vitamin C, quercetin, luteolin, apigenin. The idea is that each one may work on a different part of the problem, calming the immune response, blocking triggers, supporting inflammatory imbalance, and helping stabilize the mast cells. So look at these. I'll list them in the podcast notes. Again, PEA, lactoferrin, vitamin C, quercetin, luteolin, and apigenin. That one's a kind of an oddball one. It's a calming flavonoid found in plants like chamomile and parsley, and often discussed for nervous system inflammatory balance. And so that's why chamomile tea and parsley is so good at detoxing. It's just in nature, folks. If you need to, go to the mountains, make a trip, pick some chamomile. I was so blessed to grow up in Alberta, Canada, where it grew everywhere. We made chamomile tea all the time when I was growing up. In mast cell activation syndrome, even helpful supplements can actually trigger symptoms if the dose is too high. And again, consider if the product has fillers. So go slow, start low, and then just change one thing at a time. Address the leukotrienes and other inflammatory chemicals. Here's the inflammatory chemical many people miss. The leukotrienes is the histamine that gets the most attention because mast cells do release more than just histamine. Leukotrienes are inflammatory chemicals that can stay elevated longer than histamine during flares. They can contribute to chest tightness, airway reactivity, gut cramping, and prolonged inflammation. This is why some people block histamine and still feel inflamed. Something else that can address this type of inflammation naturally, I mentioned chamomile already, but also boswellia, black seed oil, and one of my favorites, ginger. Boswellia is often used for inflammatory pathways. Black seed is often discussed for immune and inflammatory support. Ginger is commonly used for inflammation, digestion, and nausea, and chamomile supports calming, inflammation. And again, this isn't a substitute for medical care. Some people need medications that inhibit these things, that block the mast cells, like cromolyn, but maybe look into some of the natural things that you can find at your health food store. Always, 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 friends, help the body break down and clear the chemicals. Once mast cells release those chemicals, your body has to break them down and clear them out. And this is often another layer that people miss. So if your body can't efficiently break down the histamine or clear those inflammatory mechanisms, symptoms linger longer than they should. So how to clear those, you're going to want to include this as well. Copper, B6, B12, folate, and B3. These nutrients matter because the body depends on enzymes, methylation, detoxification, obviously mitochondrial function. We need the energy there, and the nutrient sufficiency to process and clear these inflammatory chemicals. For example, copper is connected to DAO activity, and that's one of the enzymes involved in breaking down histamine in the gut. DAO is one of those things that I keep in my supplement cabinet. B vitamins are involved in methylation, energy production, nervous system function, and detox pathways. But again, this does not mean that everyone should blindly supplement copper or high-dose B vitamins. I have to be careful with copper. For some people, it's the end-all cure-all, and there's books written on just copper in and of itself being the cure-all. But I have trouble with it. Some people don't tolerate these things well, so go slow and go low. Okay? The message here is not to throw everything at it. Instead, it's helping your body get the right nutrients to clear what those mast cells are releasing. And so give your body the tools in the toolkit so it can do what it knows to do, and that's to detox, okay? If those nutrients are depleted, symptoms linger because you need the pieces parts, right? Another layer, and I mentioned it earlier, is DAO. We want to break down those histamines in food. For some people, DAO support may help when symptoms are more food histamine related. So if you do end up eating leftovers or aged meats or fermented foods or wine or kombucha or vinegar or sauerkraut or balsamic glaze on your food at, the restaurant, smoked meats, canned meats, even bone broth is high in histamines. I learned that the hard way. I went for a long time just feeling really crappy and not being able to eat, and I was just drinking bone broth all the time. Guess what it was doing? It was loading my body up with more histamines. Be careful. Sometimes we're our own worst enemy. Certain cheeses. If you're eating those things and you're just a little off, get some DAO and keep it in your supplement cabinet as well. So it may help with those food histamines, but again, MCAS is often broader than just food intolerance. That's why we have to look at triggers. We have to look at the ability of the body to detox and clear. How's our hormones doing? Look at gut health. Look at how our nervous system is regulated, and look at our environmental exposures. I know it's a lot, but look at these things. I'm not telling you got to do it all at once, but we're our own detectives of our own health, right? And so I know we have to advocate for ourselves because doctors only have so much time with us, and unless you're clinically trained, you've got to navigate these things. So look into these things that I'm sharing with you. One of the biggest pieces is to stabilize the nervous system, and I think you should do this before you do anything else because you have to feel safe and be in a rest and digest state before you can heal any condition. I don't care what it is, but especially for mast cell activation problems. Because mast cells respond not only to physical threats, but to perceived threat. Stress hormones can trigger mast cells. Poor sleep can trigger mast cells. Trauma physiology triggers it. A nervous system stuck in fight or flight can lower your ability to handle any of these extra things. And this is why nervous system regulation is absolutely non-negotiable in chronic illness. It's not all in your head. It's not all in your immune system. It's not all just in your gut, but it's all the things. So I have a clinic. It's in Central Florida. It's called Harmony Neurofeedback. And I talk a lot about central nervous system regulation with my clients because the brain is constantly scanning for safety and threat. And the tool that I found most effective over other brain training and brain rewire programs, because it's calming, because it's relaxing, and because it helps the brain see what it needs to change and redirect the maladaptive patterns into a more healthy cortical pattern and signaling from the brain to the body, I use the neurooptimal neurofeedback system. It's very helpful in supporting people with these issues. So just had to put that little plug in there because I think it's very important. It's transformed my life. I have my own system. I use it regularly to keep things flexible and adaptable and ability to handle and regulate. Okay. But I also watch my exposures. If I'm in a moldy situation, I get out. Or if I can't get out, say I'm staying in a hotel on a road trip and it is what it is, I'm going to take binders. I'm going to sweat. I'm going to work on clearing it. Okay. So women, a lot of people that listen to this podcast are middle-aged women. That's a strong part of my demographic. It's not all of it, but a lot of you are dealing with perimenopause and menopause, and a lot of these symptoms can worsen day 14, day 28, and definitely worsen as hormones start to dwindle. I used to kind of be allergic to my own hormones. I would have a biomeridian stress assessment done on myself when my symptoms were so bad, and it was always day 14 and 28. And I remember the practitioner telling me it's basically that you're allergic to your own hormones. How horrible is that, right? But again, it's because the hormone system is so directly connected to everything. And a lot of those symptoms worsen during estrogen spikes. And then also progesterone. Progesterone is a very calming hormone, and we need it. Even if you're no longer having babies and maybe you don't even have your uterus, you should still be taking progesterone for nervous system and hormone function and anti-aging. A lot of women are just told you're anxious, it's hormones, you're stressed. But what if those hormone shifts are changing because your mast cells are too activated? What if estrogen, progesterone, cortisone, and the cortisol in your body, histamines and adrenaline are just all interacting? What if the anxiety is not separate from the immune system? What if the insomnia is not separate from the histamine? What if the palpitations are not separate from the hormones? Like, I'm hitting all the things here, folks, because I think they all interplay. And then another thing, again, that I mentioned was chronic illness due to mold or Lyme disease, because if you have either of those, your mast cells are firing. Mold can be a major trigger for sensitive people. And for those people that have it, mold is not just a respiratory issue. A lot of people that I talk to that come into clinic that have racing thoughts or doom and gloom or stuck in fight or flight, I'll ask him, when did this start? Did you move? Did you have a water leak in your house, right? It can be an immune thing and histamines and stuffy nose and runny, itchy, whatever eyes. But if it's starting to cause you some cognitive issues with brain fog or some mood issues where you're just anxious and up and down and irritable, that's neuroinflammation. And that can be driven because of mold exposure. Same with fatigue, okay? Mitochondria function is often absolutely hijacked if there's mold exposure. So if mold is part of your story, the body may not be able to calm down until the exposure is identified and addressed. And even if you're out of the moldy building, you need to make sure that it's not colonized in your body and do a mold detox protocol. If you need information on that, you can go to harmonyneurofeedback.com and go to Cell Core. That's under the store page. So look at all the things. Mold infection. Is it long COVID? Is it gut inflammation? Is it hormones, estrogen, low progesterone, poor sleep, environment? Is it what I'm eating? What's on the end of my fork? Is it chronic stress? Is it all the above? For many people, MCAS is not just one thing. It's that bucket problem. When the bucket gets too full, that's when the body reacts to everything. I do want to mention really quickly something that I find that's very, very helpful. And Dr. Teitelbaum was my physician before he retired, but he is still very active online. And he is probably selling a lot of PEA supplements right now because a lot of people are looking at calming that MCAS, and that's a great supplement, as I mentioned earlier. But Dr. T has an entire protocol that addresses chronic pain, fatigue, complex illness, long-haul COVID, fibromyalgia, CFS, and it's the SHINE protocol. It stands for sleep, hormones, immunity and infections, nutrition, and exercise. And this framework fits beautifully into people that have MCAS, because MCAS support is not just about blocking histamine, it's about restoring regulation. So you want to address your sleep, you want to address your hormones, you want to address immunity and infections, clear those infections and regulate your immune system. We want nutrition to be absolutely optimal because your body needs to be supported. And then we want to exercise. Movement is key. People need to keep moving. And that's hard to do when you don't feel well, but do it anyway. Just gentle movement is fine. Take Tai Chi, watch Qigong, go for a walk, gentle stretching, whatever it takes, you've got to move your body. So if you're dealing with mast cell activation, histamine intolerance, mold, illness, POTS, anxiety, chronic fatigue, chronic pain, you're reacting to foods, you've got female issues, you've got UTIs, you've got rashes, brain fog, mystery inflammation, think through this. Number one, rule out emergencies first. Throat swelling, trouble breathing, anaphylactic stuff. Yes, you're overreacting to things. Find out what those things are. If you need to go to an immunologist or an allergy specialist, go get checked out. Number two, ask yourself, is histamine showing up in the brain as racing thoughts, ruminating thoughts, or brain fog? Is it showing up in the heart as palpitations or POTS? Is it showing up in the gut because there's bloating, reflux, or loose stools? Is it showing up in the skin because of hives, eczema, or rashes? Is it showing up in the uterus as endometriosis? Is it showing up in the bladder as interstitial cystitis? I know I'm just repeating what I said earlier. And of course, systemically, is it anaphylaxis? If it is, you know that this can point to overstimulation of the mast cells in the body. So, my friends, I hope that this has been helpful to you today. Maybe you could copy the transcript, send it to your provider, and share it with somebody that's got some crazy mystery illness. I want you to know you're not crazy, you're not weak, you're not making this stuff up. Your body may be asking you to look into some of these things. I don't want to freak you out. I don't want you to become symptom hypervigilant and scanning all the time, but I do want you to know that your nervous system is trying to get your attention. Listen to it, support it, help to stabilize it and regulate it. Not just your nervous system, but your mast cells. They're all tied together. Then your body has a better chance to heal. So thanks for listening to Healing Chronic Illness with Marley. Again, if this episode helped you understand your body in a new way, please share it with someone who's being told that their symptoms are just anxiety or just stress or it's all in their head. Because we know that sometimes the body is not making things up. In fact, it never is. Not only does it keep the score, it's trying to get our attention. It's sounding an alarm. And sometimes the most compassionate thing we can do is listen and tell it. Let your limbic system know. You're okay, you're safe, I'm taking care of it. Because many of us, for years, self-sabotaged our own nervous system by pushing through and ignoring our symptoms. Histamine is not just about allergies, okay? Mast cells can affect every system in the body. So look at it, my friends. Again, if you need some of the resources that I've listed, I'll put them in the podcast notes. You can take them to your provider. And if you're struggling with some really complicated things, maybe see if you can find an electrophysiologist. They're a cardiologist usually, but then they're starting to look at addressing mast cells a little bit deeper. And there's some medications that you can take to calm it down. And of course, all of those supplements that I provided for you to help calm the inflammation response and give your body the building blocks that it needs to clear those things once they're broken down so that you can better support your body. I will list those in the podcast notes. Okay, thanks so much for joining today. I know that's a ton of information, but hopefully those resources are a blessing to you and can help you on your pathway to healing. God bless you. Take care.